Okay. Oh, and me.
Metrication in the U.S. September 23rd, 1999. After traveling for 286 days, the Mars Climate Orbiter was getting ready to do exactly what its name suggests, enter into Mars's orbit. Things should have gone smoothly after years of preparation, but due to a problem in the conversion factors, it came 100 kilometers closer to Mars than intended. So its propulsion system began to overheat and was thus disabled. $125 million were lost that day due to a simple conversion factor that could have been easily avoided if the US were to use the metric system in place of the English system of measurement. As a college student studying to go into the medical field, I've taken many science and math courses over my years, and so therefore I've become very familiar with the metric system and have been able to see firsthand the advantages of using it in place of the English system of measurement. According to the National Institute for Standards and Technology, there are many benefits to transitioning to the metric system. These advantages apply to our education system, the scientific literacy of our country as a whole, and also the economy. Converting to the International System of Measurement, or SI for short, would save both time and money in our government and economy and education systems, and it would not be hard to actualize within the US. So to begin, let's consider why this poses a problem for our country. As of right now, the US is one of 3 countries in the whole entire world that does not use the metric system. The other 2 are Myanmar and Liberia, and that's according to the Encyclopedia Britannica. You may not have realized before now, but a lot of our everyday items utilize the metric system already. Food nutrition facts are given in gram amounts, and the front of packages are given both in the metric system units and in English units. Medicines are prescribed in milligrams and milliliters. Guns and ammo are sold in millimeters. And all scientific experiments and research are done solely in the metric system and the SI units. That's at all levels, extracurricularly, college level, and professional as well. So as David Wogan, an engineer, policy researcher, and writer for Scientific American puts it, he says, if we want to have a scientifically literate populace, we should make sure that scientists and non-scientists speak the same language. As I said before, all research and experiments are done solely in meters, kilograms, moles, liters, or some variation of that. Here's a little table of what the metric units are. But in the American school system, kids are mainly taught in feet or inches, pounds, or the myriad of confusing fluid measurements that we have that make no sense. So metric units are only discussed within science courses, and so it's easy to see why people have such a hard time understanding scientific literature within our general population unless they have a scientific background themselves. Since 1988, all federal agencies have been required to use the metric system in all procurement, grants, and other business-related activities, according to the National Institute for Standards and Technology. So, also, since 1893, the U.S. began basing its units on the meter and the kilogram. So as David Wogan again says, we have essentially given ourselves the additional burden of converting from the international standard to our own system and then back again for over 100 years. So now that we've identified why this is a problem within our country, it's time to discuss what can be done. The main argument that most Americans give for not wanting to switch over to the metric system concern questions about cost, hassle, and confusion. I propose that the plans that the government and federal agencies already have, that they came up with in the 80s, should be utilized in bringing about change within our country. The issues with past attempts were problems of lacking commitment and conviction, and also there were no time frames set up for when things needed to be done. Because of the UK's recent metrication, which was completed in 2009, I was able to look at their timeline and come up with a rough estimate of our own. So I propose that within the next 5 years, all companies should have dual measurements on all of their products, and within the next 15 should be completely switched over to having only SI units. Schools would immediately implement the metric system into their curriculum, and within 5 years would fade out all use of the English system. When it comes to road signs, like miles, speed limits, and distances, I would propose that the kilometers would be put next to the miles for up to 10 years before completely switching over, because I think this would be the place where most Americans would put up the most fight. But as you can see, we could just put up new signs next to the ones that are already existing, which would make it very easy. To aid in teaching those who are already out of school and wouldn't be learning about the metric system firsthand, the government would put up flyers and posters in their buildings and on websites to make it easily accessible for people to learn about the metric system. And then on top of that, all measuring devices and systems, along with scales, like measuring cups, stuff that you use in the kitchen, would also be converted to make it very simple. And I have an example of, these are some of the flyers or posters that were found on the National Institute for Standards and Technology website. They already have made up all this stuff from the 80s. And so keep in mind that most products already have both measurements on them, and so it's just a matter of us as Americans consciously choosing to move forward with the times and to make a change for the better. So finally, imagine with me how much simpler our lives could be after converting to the SI system. Children would no longer have to learn 2 different systems within school, and they wouldn't have to learn the dozens upon dozens of conversion factors, which are the culprit and lead to mistakes as simple as adding too much of something in a small science fair experiment, or as serious as losing $125 million in a NASA mishap. On top of that, the general population would become more scientifically literate, which would increase, the population as a whole. Our society would get better because of that. And they would have more access and ability to understand new scientific findings and data. Furthermore, the metric system is designed to be easy to use. It goes off of factors of 10 rather than just arbitrary measurements, and so it's much easier to understand and it's much more effective as well. So while it may be uncomfortable for a little while, it'll eventually become old hat to us, and even those of us who are used to the English system will get used to it eventually. And all change is disagreeable at first, so it's just a matter of getting past that and being willing to make the change. At the end of the day, it will save both time and money in our economy and our school system, and as I said before, will increase scientific literacy as a whole within our country. So the time is now. If not us, then who's going to do it? And so as the National Institute of Standards and Technology puts it, time is of the essence. Our transition to the metric system is not becoming easier or cheaper. So I'd like to end with this website, which is where you can go sign a petition to make the metric system standard in the US instead of the English system. So now I'd like to open the discussion to any questions any of you have about the metric system or transitioning from the English system to the metric system.
When did they first propose it? Because I remember in the 80s or the 70s they started talking about it.
Yeah, they started talking about it really early, but they started putting out, well, like I said, in the federal government, they started doing stuff in '88 is when they first made all the federal agencies start talking about it and using everything in metric and English. And And so even businesses, most businesses now use metric system too, just because international business, everybody else uses it except for Liberia and Myanmar, but obviously they're not big competitors or places of commerce. So when we're trying to converse with other countries about that kind of stuff, it's always in metric, because that's the standard for the rest of the world, and it's much easier to understand and use.
Including England and Canada?
Canada and England are the most recent. They've just gone through metrication. Yeah, like I said before, England just finished in 2009, because it took 30 years for their road signs to be completely switched over. So, which obviously is something that we could work on and make a lot better. But yeah, it took them a long time. They started in, I think, the 60s switching over, but it took that long for them to switch over everything. Obviously for them it was a bigger deal since they were part of the European Union, but yeah. And Canada, it was a little bit before that. It was earlier in the 2000s, but they're pretty recent too. All right.
It's an interesting fact too. This isn't really a question, but a lot of times in design, typography design, they use like the metric measurements because you can actually get really small.
Yeah.
And you're not saying like 1/60
Yeah,
of an
exactly.
inch or something. So.
Yeah, it's a lot better to use like a millimeter or a centimeter, which is a lot easier to understand than having to do like a 1/16 of an inch or something like that. So, yeah.
Yay!